There's quite a wide range of so-called standard zoom lenses on the market, each with their own strong points, their IQ, their build quality. I saw the Tamron 35 to 150mm f2.8 lens. I thought it was quite an interesting balance and alternative to the typical standard lenses on the market. I'm not going to do a super detailed, dedicated review for this lens, but I wanted to see where it shines and where it falls short compared to Tamron's own 24 to 70 f2.8 G2 lens and Canon's 24 to 105mm f4 Mark II. So let's get into it. Hey, I'm Scott and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, thanks for watching. We do all kinds of tutorials, unboxings, test reviews, anything photo and video related, so if you like the content today, please do consider subscribing and make sure to hit the little bell icon to get notifications when new videos are uploaded. We'll break this down into a handful of comparative categories, including of course image quality, but first, before we get into that, let's take a quick look at the price. The Tamron 35 to 150mm is $799. The Tamron 24 to 70 is currently listed at $1,099, but that may be a sale price. And the Canon 24 to 105 is also listed at $1,099. In terms of just the pure price, you can save a couple of $100 by going for the 35 to 150mm lens from Tamron, so let's see how it stacks up in some other areas. All three lenses have stabilization, and I found that the performance at comparable focal lengths was similar, with a stop or less difference between them. I got around 3 stops from the stabilization in the 35 to 150mm lens, and over 4 stops on the long end with the 24 to 105. The 24 to 70 fell right in between. The 35 to 150mm lens is lacking about 10mm on the wide end, and that may definitely be missed in tight spaces, but you gain almost 50mm on the long end over Canon and a full 80mm over the Tamron 24 to 70. It will definitely depend on your use and your shooting style, but that extra reach on the long end could be really useful for a lot of people, including people like myself who rarely shoot wider than 35mm anyway, and when I do, I'm usually on a dedicated wide-angle lens like the 16 to 35 from Canon, or Tamron's own 15 to 30. Do note though that the wider you go, the bigger difference a single millimeter makes, so that 10mm on the wide end might not sound like a lot, but it actually can be fairly significant if you're in those tight spaces. While the Tamron 24 to 70 has a constant f2.8 aperture, the Canon lens is stuck at f4, but the 35 to 150 lets you open up all the way down to f2.8 until just around 50mm, where you get a max of f3.2. Then it gradually stops down as you zoom out, reaching f4 at right about 105mm, which is kind of a perfect middle ground type compromise between the two $1,100 lenses and a body that's hundreds of dollars cheaper. It's kind of like you get the benefit of the wider aperture on the 24 to 70 from Tamron, together with a longer reach than the Canon lens, and even a little bit more. It may not be the compromise for everyone or every style, but it's a very powerful compromise to be put into such an affordable lens. Both the Canon lens and the Tamron 24 to 70 are built to the standards of each brand's pro line of lenses. The 35 to 150 is not quite there. That's not to say it's bad at all, really. I mean, I'm being quite picky here. But you can feel some difference when you're holding this lens side by side with something like the 24 to 70. Honestly though, even if it was worse than it really is, I would never let that stop me from choosing a lens if it performs well in other areas. But there's more to it. While all three lenses have extending barrels, and actually all of them have zoom locks for packing away the lenses, only the 35 to 150 suffers from zoom creep. It's not extreme, but it is there. That means if the lens is hanging at your side unlocked, the barrel will slowly slip and zoom out, and if you're holding the lens looking up at something above you, you might see the barrel slip and contract into itself. It can be easily managed, especially since it's not that terrible in this lens anyway, but it is there, and it is one of the things that I'd consider show the difference between a kind of consumer lens and a pro level lens. The other things that stood out to me were the lack of a focus distance window and the annoying zoom ring. It has a very light feel to it in manual mode compared to the slightly more premium lenses, and it feels like it's not really meant to be grabbed and adjusted physically while it's in autofocus mode. Plus, it actually physically spins when you autofocus, which can be very annoying. The focus throw in manual mode also is extremely short, well under 90 degrees. Not the best lens for manual focusing by a long shot, but it does have hard stops. Autofocus noise is also the loudest on the 35-150, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later in this video. Anyway, especially if you're a heavy video shooter, the manual focus experience on the 35-150 could be a deal breaker for this lens. Otherwise though, the 35-150 has a lot of the perks of the other lenses with a moisture resistant design, multiple coatings for better performance, and so on. Plus, it's a little bit lighter than the 24-70 at around 800 grams, similar to the Canon, and it has a standard 77mm filter thread, unlike the large 82mm filter thread on the 24-70. The 35-150 definitely feels like a bit more of a consumer lens in a few areas of this category, but again, with such a convenient focal range, if it does well in image quality, then that could really tip the scales one way or the other. The lens's close focus distances and maximum magnification ratios are fairly similar, but you can see a difference. The 35-150 goes down to 45 centimeters with a 0.27 times magnification. The 24-70 goes down to 38.1 centimeters with a 0.2 times magnification. And the 24-105 goes down to 45 centimeters again, but this time with a 0.24 times magnification. There are 9 rounded aperture blades in both Tamron lenses with 10 in the Canon. I'll show you how this affects circular bokeh when stopping down, as well as a few examples of photos with blurry backgrounds for you to judge for yourself. I'm personally not one for taking an overly critical look at things like diffraction or looking at test charts and diving into every corner of the image at every possible aperture and analyzing them until my eyes bleed. Those tests do exist if you want to check them out, but in terms of real world performance and sharpness and stuff like that, let's take a quick look. I really couldn't find any issues with chromatic aberration on any of these lenses, so moving on. The Canon lens has the least distracting flare, and it's also kind of softer and warmer in coloration, which artistically I like. The Tamron lenses have more green to their flare, and the 35-150 is probably the worst overall in my opinion, but the 24-70 at 70mm is also kind of distracting. I was going to show Vignette performance in detail, but there really wasn't anything too significant to differentiate between them in real-world tests for the most part. Again, more careful scientific tests do exist, and it would be faster just to look at those if you're really that into Vignette, but for now I'll just point out that on the long end, the 35-150 probably shows the most Vignette of the three. Also, the center of the 24-70 actually darkens a bit as the corners lighten up from 2.8 to 3.2, kind of interesting. I didn't test this super scientifically, I wanted to see the effect in more real-world situations. The 35-150 is obviously not as wide as the other two lenses, but it does have the least distortion on the wide end, as probably should be expected. When they're all at 35mm though, the 24-70 is actually just a little bit better. The 24-70 holds on to that lead around the 70mm end, with the Canon coming in second and the 35-150 showing the most noticeable curvature. That continues out toward the longer focal lengths as well. These videos actually seem to make it the most visible throughout that zoom range. As you may have noticed in those videos, the 35-150 actually flickers as you zoom, which means that the aperture blades aren't adjusting as smoothly as the other two lenses, which don't show that problem at all. This is shot at a continuous f4, so it's not the aperture blades closing down as you zoom out, it's just them adjusting for the focal length. It's only a problem for video, and even then, it's only a problem if you're zooming while recording though. I also originally planned to go a little more in detail with sharpness, looking at edges and corners and all that, but honestly, the performance was so similar to my eyes in real-world tests that it's not worth it. Once again, really careful tests and studio conditions with test charts and all that do exist if you really want to see, and I will throw up a couple examples here at 100% while I'm talking, and if you want to download these files to inspect them for yourself, I'll have a link in the video description. Basically though, all of these lenses are sharp enough for me in the center, and they're all a little bit soft in the corners, but the bottom line is that the 35-150 did not fall behind even though it is the cheapest. I honestly found that, at least while shooting on the mirrorless EOS R, that all of these lenses were very accurate in autofocus, and especially Canon's DPAF is to thank for that, but I did find that the 35-150 could sometimes struggle. It felt like it was a little bit unsure of itself before locking onto focus compared to the other two. As for focus speed, the EOS R isn't really a super fast camera, but I got fairly similar results out of all three lenses with my son running straight towards the camera. The one exception is that the 35-150's uncertainty in focusing made it take longer and therefore get less shots in the same amount of time. In video, autofocus actually seemed to work pretty well and pretty smoothly on all of them with the EOS R. The autofocus on the 35-150 is definitely the loudest, and when you have an on-camera microphone, if you're in a silent room with no other noise, you can hear all of them if you listen closely, but the 35-150's autofocus noise would probably get in the way even if you had more environmental noise and a subject talking. As for focus breathing, these lenses definitely all do have it, and if I had to say that one was the worst, it'd probably be the 35-150. You can see the effect of focus breathing a lot more when I zoom from the extreme close focus to the extreme far focus, but it still is present even with just shifting focus a meter or two. So taking into account what these lenses can offer, how they're built, and how they perform, I think that the 35-150 is still an interesting lens. The focal length for me is very, very useful, and it is nice to have a wider aperture than f4 on that wide end. Most of the time, like I said, I personally won't miss that extra 10mm on the wide end, and when I do need that, I'm going to be using a dedicated wide angle lens anyway, and for me, just the huge range that this lens encompasses is just a great all-around kind of do-it-all walk-around lens. It does have a few quirks like the zoom creep and the weird manual focus experience, which would probably be the biggest thing that turns me off, but the IQ was solid, and although the autofocus was a little bit more uncertain than the other two lenses, if you're not really shooting sports, I didn't find that it would really get in the way at all. For a few $100s cheaper than these other two lenses, it still has vibration compensation, it's still moisture resistant, and it still has all of the coatings that Tamron is known for, and it feels like it's built decently well besides the few things that I did talk about. If you really value the convenience that this lens presents, or if you're on a very tight budget, I think it would be a great choice because it still does pretty well in terms of image quality, and it could technically replace two other lenses for you because of that really wide focal range. If money was not as much of an issue and I didn't already own the Canon lens, I would really struggle to choose between the f2.8 aperture and arguably better build quality of the Tamron and the convenience of that 105mm reach with the Canon lens as well as the more standardized 77mm filter thread. The background picture on my desktop computer is still a picture that I took with this lens over 2 years ago when I originally tested it, so I guess that says something. But since then, this Canon lens has been with me on a number of photo and video shoots. It's been in the rain, it's been covered in fish guts, and it's still going as strong as the day that I got it. So which lens would you go for? Tell me down in the comments and let me know why. Which features are the deciding factors for you in a lens like this? Otherwise, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know down below and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. And if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. As always, thank you for watching.